Soulsborne games are some of the most popular video games to date. With such a strong community of committed players, speedrunners, and lore enthusiasts, it's no surprise that when other companies attempt to replicate that formula, there tends to be some backlash from the fan base. In recent years, we have seen an uptick in improvements to these Souls-like games. Developers have moved past just trying to copy and paste the Souls games and actually create something with a familiar feel, but plenty of unique elements to set it apart. Games like Steel Rising, Thymesia, and Mortal Shell have done well to mimic the feel of Souls games, providing engaging combat and decent stories, but they all still feel like they're missing that something special, that element that makes a Souls game stick out. And then we got Lies of P. This was the first game I have ever played not developed by From Software that matches the spirit of the Soulsborne games. For real, you could have told me From Software developed this game and I would have believed you. The combat was incredible, easy to learn but hard to master. The weapon variety was impressive, especially with all the different elemental status effects that could be applied to them. The world building was intricate and the enemy designs were unique and challenging. The gameplay, while not truly identical to other Souls games, hit that sweet spot of familiar yet unfamiliar that made this feel like a Souls game. But for some reason upon this game's release, even though it was met with widespread acclaim, there was an equal amount of people who had bad things to say about the game. The arguments were hilariously contradictory. Somehow the game has clunky, uncontrollable mechanics unlike any real Souls game, while also having a carbon copy moveset like every other Souls game ever made. These arguments usually come from Software purists, who usually aren't in the majority, but oftentimes it's the smallest radical group with the wackest opinions who shout the loudest. And sadly, a lot of people heard these complaints and didn't even give the game the time of day. Which really bothers me because it was such a well done game. The devs clearly put a lot of time and effort into it to make it not only one of the best Souls-like games of all time, but one of the most fun experiences with a video game I had in years. Which is why I desperately do not want to see the same thing happen to Black Myth Wukong. I've had my eye on this game for the last 3 years. Back in 2020, they released a 13-minute gameplay trailer of the game in its early stages as a call to arms, asking if people wanted to come and help work on it. They already had a team of about 20 people, but they knew for a game of this scale it would require a lot more hands on deck. And the gameplay they put together by those 20 people had me hooked from the start. The abilities were so cool looking, the way he stops time and deflects projectiles, and the whole thing looked immaculate. The boss battles ranged in scale from human-sized monsters to flying dragons 10 times your size. This portion of the game was built in Unreal Engine 4, and the team has confirmed that the final product is being built in Unreal Engine 5, so it will somehow look even better on the game's release. Since then, they have been keeping new fans up to speed with regular updates on progress, new trailers, and chances to play demos to get a feel for what's working and what is not. Clearly, this is a studio committed to giving us the best quality game possible. These are just some of the reasons that this game has me so excited. I want to make sure that everybody knows about this and gives it a fair shot. So let's take a look at all the reasons Black Myth Wukong could transcend the Soulsborne formula and become one of the best games of 2024. First off, let's take a look at This game looks remarkably similar to Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Fans of video games know that Sekiro and the phrase best combat in a video game are often used in the same breath. With an emphasis on parrying, the swordplay is complex and captivating. You often find yourself trading blows with enemies, getting into combat encounters that force you to think on your feet. Constant movement is a must, attacking from both the ground with wide slashes and vaulting into the air for piercing strikes. Wukong somehow feels like the spiritual successor to Sekiro, offering all of this and more. The combat will be intermingled with 72 different and interchangeable abilities, such as transformations, elemental enhancements, and weapon manipulation, such as the staff shrinking or growing in size. Wukong will also be able to incorporate stances kind of similar to the Neo games. There are 3 stances that we know about: Smash Form, Pillar Form, and Thrust. Smash extends the reach of the staff, Pillar will boost your defense capabilities, and the Thrust is focused on charge attacks to break defenses and stagger enemies. Unlike original Souls games, which are primarily defense-oriented, this will reward players who are more aggressive with their playstyle. And there will be no true block ability for Sun Wukong, only a parry system, once again similar to Sekiro, so you have to remain quick and hit your opponents with every chance you get. Our starting weapon is Wukong's legendary bow staff. At this time, the staff is believed to be our only weapon we receive in the game, very similar to Sekiro. Now, some people will look at this as if it were a negative, but that is not the case. If your combat is good, you do not need to have multiple weapons. Again, just look at Sekiro. It is praised as one of the greatest Souls games of all time, and is often mentioned to have one of the best combat systems in gaming. and you use the same sword you started the game with to beat the final boss. If Wukong is anything like Sekiro, you will not be able to button mash your way out of encounters. You will have to use every skill at your disposal, know when to pull out what trick, and memorize each enemy's style of combat and find the most effective way to counter it. If the team pulls off the balance of limited weaponry with boundless combat variety, this could easily give From Software a run for its money. And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of Sekiro. Its combat is one of my favorites in gaming. If Wukong achieves everything it has set out to do, this could easily rise above it. But of course, the creative combat is best partnered with well-crafted. One major complaint that many people have about video games today is the lack of enemy design. Nothing makes for more of a stale playing experience than having to mow down these same nameless faces for hours on end. Now, Game Science has claimed they are creating over 100 different variety of enemies, so their combat stays just as engaging and fresh as the first time you booted up the game. In the few gameplay trailers we have seen, we already know of a few of these designs. Monks with light or heavy attack patterns, groups of shield-wielding fox bandits, multi-headed ratmen, and all manners of eldritch abominations. At one point, you have to fight your way through a literal army of heavenly warriors. Not an exaggeration, an army worth of NPCs. You will have to contend with all sorts of weapons as well. Long-reaching war axes, swords, spears, flaming arrows, lightning staffs, and that's not even looking at what the bosses have to offer. Giant bullmen, flame-wielding wolf sorcerers, titan-sized bears, flying demons with blades for arms. At one point, there is just a giant head rolling at you breathing fire. And the dragon. No doubt you fought dragons in video games before, but not one with the fluid motions and abilities of an ancient Chinese dragon god. What is super impressive is the scale on these fights. Some encounters will be very close quarters, hand-to-hand fights with creatures our size or smaller. And there are creatures so big that Wukong is eclipsed by the shadow of his enemy. More than once when watching this gameplay trailer, a creature bigger than my screen pulls up to the fight and I'm just thinking to myself, how am I supposed to beat this thing? Looking back at Sekiro, there are plenty of incredible boss fights there as well. A majority of these fights you have are human-sized or decently bigger. All of them are unbelievable, but once again, they are mainly focused on direct sword combat, where your enemy has a similar skill set to your own. The biggest bosses that I can think that you have to fight are the Ape, the Demon of Hatred, and the Divine Dragon. But in my opinion, these larger scale boss fights weren't incredibly deep in their mechanics. Wukong seems to be going slightly a different route. The enemies are more varied in size, but they all attack you in a number of ways. Not only will the smaller enemies fight you in hand-to-hand, but they will also throw elemental attacks at you and your surroundings, causing you to need to move to higher ground to avoid being struck. The largest enemies will launch large-scale attacks that obliterate your surroundings. Similar to Sekiro, it seems to combine the best of what Sekiro has to offer while expanding and improving on combat in the typical Souls games. Boss battles in Sekiro and hopefully Wukong will feel like a dance, unlike other Souls games. Like Elden Ring, for example, where boss battles consist of a single solid hit and a series of dodges. One hit, dodge. One hit, dodge. Which isn't a jab at Elden Ring at all. The boss fights are still super challenging, very entertaining, and they are in no way, shape, or form bad. But compared to Sekiro, Elden Ring sacrifices a lot of the fine-tooth mechanics of their combat in favor of a wider variety of weapons and spells. If Wukong has the same level of quality in its enemies as Sekiro, it will make for an easy Game of the Year contender. The only thing that I could think of that could possibly make this game better is a good... This story could be really good as well. Now, storytelling is not From Software's strong suit, not that it needs to be, but they are very good at incorporating lore into their game. But the story in them just isn't what draws people in. Wukong looks like it may have the unbelievable combat of a Souls game with the remarkable storytelling of games like God of War. Now, this game is loosely based off the novel Journey to the West, a story so magnificent its influences are still being felt today. It is entirely possible that this game could have a super cool story to follow along with what is arguably one of the strongest fictional characters in existence. Now, a lot of people are understandably being cautious with this game. Far too often, gamers are burned by empty promises and money-making schemes wearing the mask of a well-designed game. Here are just a few reasons why we can be a little more trusting of Game Science. First of all, most of everything we have been shown is raw gameplay. Yes, there are story moments where we get pre-rendered cutscenes, but a lot of what they have shown through trailers is actual gameplay. I really respect companies that just live by a show, don't tell mentality. They didn't just say you'll be able to transform into a giant ape and set yourself on fire. They showed us what it looks like in real time. Secondly, they have been very upfront during the entire development. Like I said before, I have been waiting on this game for 3 years, and not once throughout the wait did I wonder what was going on with the game or why we were waiting so long. The devs gave timely updates updates, the occasional trailer, and consistently showed me just enough to retain my interest without spoiling the entire game for me. This is how you keep hype up for your game. Other companies need to take notes. I'm looking at you, Team Cherry. Lastly, Game Science themselves have committed to excellence in their mission statement, and have even said they would take accountability if the players see the studio lose sight of their focus. In an era where we receive so many half-hearted apology letters from devs after releasing an incomplete, buggy mess of a game, it is really refreshing to see a team step up and say, let us know if we drop the ball, because we value and respect you as consumers. If all of this isn't enough to get you excited for what may just be Game of the Year in 2024, then more for me, I guess.